Hello Divas, welcome to my YouTube channel where I talk about literally whatever I want to, but mostly books. Now, I would be lying if I said that I don't feel extremely special whenever I read or talk about an obscure book. There's nothing I love more than finding a hidden gem that nobody has really heard of and being the first to kind of introduce it to people. And I know that that sounds a little bit pretentious, or maybe a lot of bit pretentious, but I think that you would be lying if you said that you don't feel the same way, honestly. Whenever you find that hidden, beautiful gem that nobody has really heard of, that you absolutely love, and you get everybody in your friend group to read, that feeling is unlike any other feeling in the world. So today I'm going to talk to you guys about some obscure books that you need to read. And I'm splitting this up into two different sections. Obscure books that you need to read, and then obscure books that we need to read. I have a lot of books to cover in this video, so let's just jump into it. Now you may be wondering what qualifies as an obscure book, and I was thinking that myself too, and what I decided on is all of the books that I'm talking about in this video have under 5,000 reviews on Storygraph. I know that Storygraph isn't particularly flawless, and Goodreads might actually be a better way of sensing how popular or obscure books are. But I just prefer Storygraph. I like it more. It's not owned by Amazon. You can follow me on Storygraph if you would like. The link is in the description. But yeah, as I was looking into books that I wanted to talk about for this video, I felt like under 5,000 reviews was a good number. I also do want to say my biggest fear going into this video is that somebody would know every single one of the books that I talk about, and that would be very embarrassing if I made an obscure books video and somebody knew every single book that I talked about. I do think that I have a really good collection here. I don't think that anybody watching will know all of these books, but if you know most of these books, just like don't say anything. It'll be our little secret, right? Okay, work. Again, I have a lot of books to get into, so let's just get into this. I'm going to start off with the books that you should read, and I'm going to go from like the most popular to the least popular. First up, I have The Employees by Olga Ravin. I don't know how to pronounce her name. I'm so sorry. This is actually the only book on this list that breaks the rule of having under 5,000 reviews on Storygraph, but I haven't really heard anybody on BookTube or Book Talk really talk about this book, so I wanted to bring it up anyways. This is a science fiction book, which I'm usually not a huge fan of, but I think that it's executed in a really experimental and interesting way. So I think that even if you're not a fan of science fiction, you might enjoy this if the premise sounds interesting to you. I also think that this is maybe one of the most beautiful book covers that I've ever seen in my entire life. This is absolutely a book that I bought because of the cover. There's something so artistic and evocative about this piece. I find it to be so interesting and pretty reflective of the tone of the book. This is also an extremely quick read. I think that I read this in one sitting, although I would kind of recommend breaking it into multiple sittings because I think that way it would really sit with you. It's less than 125 pages, and you can see that not all of the pages are full. This is told from statements of the employees on this sci-fi intergalactic ship. This ship has picked up a bunch of objects from this planet New Discovery, and we follow these statements of humans and humanoids as they become increasingly attached to these objects. It's a very interesting book in the way that you need to be the one to put all of the pieces together. In that way, it can be a little bit frustrating and a little bit confusing as you're reading it, but it is so rewarding, especially once you get to the end. I think that the end is really simple, but also very impactful. I think that this is absolutely incredible. I would highly recommend it, especially if you can find this copy. I mean, again, just fucking look at the cover. Look at the cover and tell me that you don't want to read this book. You can't. Once again, that was the only book on this list that breaks the rule of having under 5,000 reviews on Storygraph. So now we're going to get into the books that are a little bit more obscure. And the next book that I have is People from My Neighborhood by Hiromi Kawakami. I absolutely love Japanese literature. Sometimes the translations can be a little bit rough, but overall, I've never read a Japanese book that I've absolutely hated. And some of my favorite authors and books come from Japan. So if you're not reading Japanese translated works, you need to fucking get on it. This is another book that is extremely easy to read, and you can read it in one sitting, like I did, or you can really break it up into pieces, and I do think that that way it is a little bit more impactful. It's technically a short story collection, but it all takes place in this neighborhood, so all of the stories are kind of connected in a way. And this is a very strange collection of characters that I just absolutely loved reading about. I think that the biggest flaw when it comes to this book is the way that I read it, which is in one sitting. I do think that this is best read in small bits. It's really tempting to read it all because it's 120 pages and every short story is only like 2 to 5 pages long. But I would highly recommend taking it in bits and pieces because I think it would really stick with you longer that way. These characters are just so strange and absurd that it is so fascinating to read about them that I think that if you were to read it over the course of several days or several weeks, it would really resonate and stick with you and never really leave your mind. Whereas if you read the entire book in one sitting, all of the characters would kind of just jumble together in a way. This world is a one-of-a-kind world, which I absolutely love reading about. I love reading about just weird, absurd, silly characters and settings. And I think that Hiromi Kawakami does an incredible job of doing that. Next up, I have Mole Flanders by Daniel Defoe, and I have an absolutely gorgeous copy of this book. I mean, fucking come on. This is kind of an outlier in this list in a way because this is the only book that I've read for school and it's the only classic on this list. Daniel Defoe is a very prolific Old English author, so you might have already heard of him, but I was quite surprised to see that this book did have under 5,000 reviews on Storygraph because I really loved this. Obviously, it is a classic. It was published in 1722, which I already know is going to alienate some people, but I would highly recommend not letting that alienate you because this book is a lot of fun. The entire title of this book is The Fortunes and Misfortunes of Mole Flanders, and that's exactly what this follows. It follows this extremely interesting woman, Mole Flanders, and basically her entire life, which is just extremely fascinating to read about. She's born in prison, she has 5 husbands, she goes through so much shit in life, and she is just trying to make her way through the world in any way that she can. There's a lot of interesting messages in this book about poverty and about gender. It was an absolutely fascinating book to study, and it's one of my favorite books that I've ever read for school. Some things that I will say in this book is, obviously, it's a classic that was published in the 1700s, so it is a little bit dense and it is a little bit difficult to read. But what I found out about classics is that even if they are really good, they're always going to be difficult to read while you're reading them. You're just going to appreciate them once you're finished. So I'm not going to lie to you and say that this is an easy book to read because it's not. What I will say is that if you are able to listen to the audiobook of this, I would highly, highly recommend that. Whoever did the narration on this audiobook did such an incredible job of transforming kind of this difficult to understand English and make it in a very accessible and easy to understand narration. Obviously, it is still older English, but it's a lot more accessible and a lot more digestible than reading it, in my opinion, because somebody is already doing the hard work of modernizing it a little bit. I think that this is an absolute blast and a half. If you are wanting to get into classics, I think that this is a great option because it is so fun and silly, and I don't feel like a lot of classics have that sort of camp factor to them. But this one does. I really enjoy it. I really, really like this book. And again, I understand if you don't want to read it because it is a classic and it is a little bit more dense. But I also don't think that you will be disappointed if you decide to pick it up. And again, I mean, look at this copy. This copy is just beautiful. I mean, if you're able to get this copy, get this copy. Next up, I have a poetry collection, and that is Dreamwork by Mary Oliver. I'm sure that a lot of you have heard of Mary Oliver before, but I haven't talked about her, and this book has under 5,000 reviews, so I thought I would talk about it because I loved this collection. I will be honest and say that I haven't read any other of her collections, so I can't compare this to her other collections, but I do believe that this has some of her best and most popular work. But it's also mixed in with a lot of poems that aren't extremely well known. I genuinely believe that Mary Oliver is kind of the greatest of all time when it comes to poetry. Every single poem of hers that I read just resonates so deeply with me. She also has such a unique and distinct style that when you read a poem of hers, you know that it's hers. Reading her poems feels like sitting at a stream and looking out onto a sunset full of the most beautiful scenery that you have seen in your entire life. Her poems are very nature driven, and you can really feel that and resonate with that, but they also have such strong philosophy and ideology behind them that really makes you think and ponder and reflect on your life. Like I said, I really think that she is the golden standard when it comes to poetry. And I also think that she is a very accessible artist when it comes to poetry. This is just an absolutely beautiful, insane collection. If you've read Mary Oliver before, please pick this up. And if you haven't read Mary Oliver before, please pick this up. It is so fantastic. I promise you will not be disappointed by this. Next up, I have The Seas by Samantha Hunt, which I read in a book club. If you're from the book club, fucking shout out to you. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you so deeply. Mwah! But this is an incredible book. I think that Samantha Hunt did such a good job on this, and it really made me want to read her other work once I finished this. This follows an unnamed narrator who is clearly dealing with some sort of mental health issue as she's trying to understand her father's death and her relationship with this significantly older Iraq war veteran. Beyond that, I don't really want to say much because I went into this book pretty blind, and I think that that is the best way to do so. It's a very mystical and atmospheric book, maybe one of the most atmospheric books that I've ever read. It's fascinating, it's captivating, it grabs you from the very first couple of chapters, and then it just keeps on going. It's an absolutely beautiful story with beautiful prose that I would highly recommend, especially if you do enjoy kind of the more slow-paced, introspective, confusing-ish type of books. This does have some experimental qualities to it, but I don't think that it's overly experimental. I think that everything that Samantha Hunt does has a purpose, and it is executed perfectly. This is just an absolute stunner of a book, and I mean, like, come on, look at the cover. It's fucking beautiful. Lock in. Get it. I highly recommend it. Next up, I have this book, which I am allowed to say the title of, but I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say the title of it on YouTube, so I'm not going to. But I was actually quite surprised to discover that this book qualified for this list because I think that this should almost be mandatory reading for everybody. Something that I find really interesting about this book is that it was originally written to be a children's book, and then it kind of transformed to a more adult audience. But you can see in the book and in the drawings that inspiration and that quality is still a part of the book. This basically explores a utopian society of queer people and their allies and what that world would look like. It really explores the intersectionality of identities and how they play into this world and how queer people are not alone in this fight for equality. There are so many other groups of people who have supported us along the journey for equality and who also deserve this fight and this love and this attention. It is a very inclusive book and a very inclusive study of this society, while also being a very interesting critique on masculinity. It's almost a philosophical book in a way, but it's not alienating in that sense. I wouldn't say that this is an overtly accessible book, but I do think that it is accessible in a way. Its writing style is fairly simple, but it is a little bit poetic. There's not a ton of pages. I think it's under 120 pages. And again, a lot of the pages are not completely full or they consist of drawings. I have a lot of quotes underlined in this book that I wanted to read to you, but I think that they work better in the context of the entire book. So I would just highly recommend going out, buying it, reading it. Again, I think that it is required reading, especially if you are part of the LGBTQ community or you claim to be an ally. I just think that this is one of the most important pieces of literature that I've ever read and one of the most interesting pieces of literature that I've ever read. So once again, I am quite surprised that it's been out since I think 1977 and it still has under 5,000 reviews on Storygraph. So once again, I would highly recommend it. Definitely check it out. It's incredible. It's beautiful. I love it. Point blank, period. Next up, I have this book. It's The Sluts by Dennis Cooper. I wasn't sure if I can say that, but I'm sure I can. I just don't think that I can really show this cover for too long. I will say about The Sluts off the back is that it's not a book for everybody. It is a very dark and disturbing book. One of the most disturbing books that I have ever read in my entire life. Dennis Cooper is an author who is very transgressive and who does push the boundaries. I think that he does it in a somewhat respectful way and in a way that isn't always pushing the boundaries just to push the boundaries, but sometimes in The Sluts, I do think it can get to that point. However, it doesn't take away the excellent commentary that the book is providing. I really respect the book in a certain regard, but I do think that it is important to protect your peace while reading it. I don't even particularly think that you need to look at the trigger warnings of that book because it's every single trigger warning under the sun, point blank, period. It's fucking crazy. I felt extremely sick to my stomach while reading it, but once I put it down, once I was done with it, I really respected what it was doing. The Sluts is written basically entirely over internet chat rooms, review boards, message boards. It starts off as this review board for this prostitute named Brad, and then it kind of devolves into chaos as people start leaving reviews and messages about the increasingly fucked up things that they have done to this person or who they assume to be this person. It comments on true crime culture in a way that I think is very interesting and extremely ahead of its time because this book was published in 2004. And I think that it shines some light on this really dark time for the queer community where people were forced to be repressed and they were forced into these extremely dark spaces where they kind of had no other option than to get themselves into these extremely dangerous situations. Obviously, one of my biggest issues with the book is the fact that it gets really dark and really disturbing. Another issue with the book is that there are a lot of lies in the book, and so it's really hard to figure out who's being a reliable narrator and who's not. So at a certain point, especially towards the end, when we're getting these really graphic, fucked, insane things that are happening, it's really difficult to read about. And then whenever we're told, like, oh, XYZ was lying, it kind of is like, okay, then why did we need to read all of that horrific shit? On one hand, I think it's serving a purpose. On the other hand, I think it's a little bit too much. But either way, I do think that transgressive literature is extremely important. I think that experimental, transgressive, and extremely sexual art is important. I think that as long as you're trying to say something and the message comes across, you can kind of go wherever you want to go. It really just depends on the audience on how much they're willing to take. So while I was open and receptive to take the violence and the monstrosity of this book, I completely understand if not everybody is willing to, and I wouldn't recommend that everybody goes into this book. However, if you find this concept interesting, if you find the themes interesting, I would highly recommend going into it. I think it's absolutely incredible. While it is dark and disturbing, I think that there is reason and purpose behind it. I love the use of the taboo in literature, and I think that while The Sluts doesn't do the best job at it, I think that it does a really good job at it. Next up is a book that I'm not going to spend too much time on because I've already talked about it in depth in multiple other videos, and that is The Three of Us by Ori Ojbaj Williams. I know you're sick and tired of me talking about this book, but until one person comments and tells me that they read it and they loved it and they're gonna tell everybody else to read it, I'm not gonna stop talking about it because I fucking love this book. If you want an in-depth plot summary and analysis, go to my last video about marriages and divorces because I talk about it a lot in that video. But basically, it follows an unnamed husband and wife and the wife's best friend Temmie. Temmie and the husband have a lot of conflict and it follows all of their dynamics. It's short, it's snappy, it's funny, it's interesting. It has a lot of fascinating commentary about marriages. I'm just absolutely obsessed with the book. I think more people need to read it, and I'm not gonna stop talking about it until more people have. Next up, I have Every Sweet Thing is Bitter by Samantha Cruson. This follows our main character, Providence, and we learn basically immediately in the book that when she was 13, she ran over her mother with a car. She didn't kill her, but she did go to jail, and becoming a felon changed her life. After she was released from prison, she didn't really talk to her family, but she decides to go to her hometown once her mother goes missing. She decides to do that not only to get some closure with her family, but also because she's not entirely convinced that her mother just disappeared. She believes that her abusive father killed her, and she's basically going to confront him. This is a lot different than other books that I tend to read. It is a little bit more of a thriller mystery than I'm usually into, but I do think that it does have some literary fiction elements to it. Generally, I find this concept and this plot summary to be extremely fascinating, which is part of the reason why I picked it up and read it. And I think that if you find this plot summary to be interesting, you won't be disappointed by it, but I would recommend it for people who are a little bit more into the thriller mystery genre. It is also a little bit melodramatic, which I don't hate and that I do think works really well for this book, but that's also kind of an energy that I just usually don't gravitate towards. The last negative thing that I'll say about this book is that I don't love what ended up happening to the mom. I don't want to say more than that because it happens towards the end of the book and it is kind of this shocking reveal moment. We've spent this entire book trying to figure out what happened to the mom, and I found the payoff of that to be a little bit disappointing. But I think that beyond that, this has some very interesting and fleshed out characters, even if sometimes it does get into kind of stereotypical territory. And I think that that works because not all of the characters are like that. Some of them are very unique, very interesting, very singular, and even the characters that do kind of lean on stereotypes, they're very fleshed out, and so I don't particularly care that they're stereotypical. Maybe stereotypical is the wrong word because I don't particularly think that the characters are perpetuating harmful narratives about marginalized communities. I do think that some of the characters are a little bit cliche and I've seen that particular trope in other books or movies or TV shows. But once again, I think that all of the characters are so fleshed out that it really doesn't matter that they're cliched a little bit. I know that I don't particularly sound obsessed with this book, and I'm really not. I really enjoy the book. I don't love it, but I do really, really like it. And I think that it is a very strong and solid mystery thriller type of book. Next up, I have On Gold Mountain by Lisa C., which is another book that I read for school, interestingly. Lisa C. is another author that you might have heard of, but you probably haven't heard of this book. This is kind of an outlier on this list because it's one of the only nonfiction books on this list, but I do think that it almost reads as fiction. This follows Lisa C.'s great-great-grandfather once he immigrated from China to America. And then it basically follows her entire family line from 1867 to when Lisa C. was a child. But it mostly follows her great-grandfather, Fong C. Fong C is a very interesting person. He was very influential in California at this time, and it was very fascinating to read about this historical figure who isn't particularly talked about, but who was surrounded by people who are talked about a lot in the present day. For example, a supporting character in this book is Anna May Wong, which I found to be really interesting. If you don't know, Anna May Wong was kind of considered the first Asian American actress who gained a lot of critical acclaim in America and internationally. And I knew about her going into this book, so I found it very fascinating that she was a pretty big part of this book. It talks about immigration and discrimination not only against the C family, but also against Fong C's wife, who is a Caucasian woman. That was obviously considered to be very taboo and very controversial. And it follows their marriage as they kind of figure that out. There's this dichotomy of Fong C wanting to commit to his traditional Chinese values and Taisi, who is wanting to be progressive and move forward. And even though it does kind of read as fiction, everything is based off of real life documents, real life interviews. I think that Lisa C. does an incredible job at kind of balancing this nonfiction with this fictional type of element. I just think that this is a very fascinating and interesting read, especially about early America and Chinese culture in early America. I just think that it is a really interesting, beautiful, and really unique book that I would highly recommend. All right, and then the last book in this particular section is Bugsy and Other Stories by Raphael Frumkin, I want to say. This is a short story collection consisting of 5 short stories, and just like any other short story collection, it is pretty hit and miss. But I also think that it is pretty all killer, no filler. There's only one story in here that I didn't particularly enjoy, but the rest I thought were pretty high quality. The first short story is called Bugsy, which is about a really depressed woman who is trying to figure out her way in life, and then she discovers this BDSM kink community that she feels really drawn to. I don't tend to read a lot of books about kink or BDSM, but I think that this was approached in a very respectful, interesting way. It's very clear to me that Raphael Frumkin has either a very strong connection to this community or he did a lot of research before writing this short story. That also applies to the short story On the Inside, which follows a kid with autism and his parents as they are trying to figure him out. It follows the perspective of the mother and the child, and we really get to see both of their thoughts, and we really get to understand the perspective of this kid who is being treated as this experiment almost. It's a very thought-provoking, interesting piece that I think is one of the most respectful pieces of work that I've ever read. We have another story in here called Fugato, which follows a psychiatrist as he goes through a mental breakdown. We have The Last Show, which is about a old woman on her deathbed and kind of the last moments of her life and the hallucinations that she sees. And then we have my personal favorite, Like and Subscribe, which is about an e-girl who is being stalked or courted by her biggest fan. And that short story is honestly one of my favorite things that I've ever read. I think that it is an absolute blast and a half. If you've watched Denora, I think that it is very similar, not only in the fact that it follows this sex worker who is being courted, but I also think that Nora's sense of humor and this short story sense of humor is very similar. I love stories that have all of these characters that intersect in a really unhinged and interesting way. And I feel like and Subscribe does that extremely, extremely well. It also has those emotional and introspective moments that don't just make it extremely funny to read, but also extremely impactful. I'm very happy that I found this book. I don't know if you guys know about the blind date with the books, but that is how I got this book. And I'm extremely happy that I did. I absolutely loved this collection. Again, some stories are stronger than others, but you're just gonna get that with any short story collection. And like I said, Bugsy on the Inside and Like and Subscribe are some of my favorite pieces of work that I've ever read. And Raphael Frumkin is a pretty small author from what I can tell. I mean, I hadn't heard of him before picking up this book, and this book only has 70 reviews on Storygraph. So if you want to support an indie author and read an incredible short story collection, I would highly recommend this. I also think that Fugato is available online somewhere, and maybe Bugsy is as well. So if you want to check those out before committing to the entire book, you absolutely can. I will try and find them and link them in the description. But yeah, just an absolutely incredible short story collection. All right, now that I've talked about all of the obscure books that you need to read, it's time to get into some obscure books that we need to read, all right? And I do want to say, my neighbor so rudely decided to do some yard work. So I'm so sorry if you hear that in the background, but unfortunately, murder isn't legal, so I can't do anything about it. Now, you don't have to read this, but I desperately want to read this, and it is the collected works of Queen Elizabeth I. A few semesters ago, I took a British literature class, and we studied a little bit of Queen Elizabeth I's poems, and I found them to be extremely interesting and extremely fascinating. And I did some of my projects on how her poems add some context to her reign. I resonated very deeply with her work, and so I really want to read everything that she wrote. Obviously, Queen Elizabeth I, monarch, one of the first female rulers of Britain. I'm not really a history person. I don't know a ton about history, but I do think that reading her work would add some very interesting context to her reign. And like I said, even one of her poems adds a lot of depth and intrigue to her legacy. This contains speeches, letters, poems, and prayers. And while it is pretty long, I'm sure pretty dense and pretty varied in quality, I'm still very excited to read this. This only has 25 reviews on Storygraph, which is very low, but also makes a little bit of sense because I'm sure this is more of a scholarly work rather than a casual reading piece. But I did want to shine some light on Queen Elizabeth I as an author because I think that her poetry is really good and really interesting. If you're able to read On Monsieur's Departure, I would highly recommend it. That's the poem that I did a very deep analysis on in the class. I'm sure it's in here, but I don't really feel like reading it to you, so that's another one I'll link in the description. Why the fuck not? Next up, I have Maggie, or A Man and a Woman Walk Into a Bar by Katie Yee. I'm going to read you the first two paragraphs of the plot description because that's all that I've read and I was immediately hooked. A man and a woman walk into a restaurant. It sounds like the start of a joke, or at the very least, like the start of a date. Instead, it's the end of a marriage. Because, on this night, our unnamed narrator finds out her husband is having an affair with a white woman named Maggie. Here's another one. A woman walks into an examination room, but the ache in her breast isn't heartbreak, it's cancer. and she ends up naming the tumor Maggie. I haven't read the rest of the plot description because this is just totally something that is me, 100%. I mean, my last video was literally about marriages and divorces. This is something that is extremely fascinating to me. This is one of my book of the month picks, which I have kind of conflicted feelings about book of the month. I'm not even gonna lie, I think that the only book that I ended up reading of like my 6 books that I got from them was Every Sweet Thing is Bitter, but that doesn't mean that I'm not interested in the rest. I have a ton of book of the month books on my shelf that I am just waiting to read, but I just haven't got around to them yet. I have thought about doing a very brutally honest review about book of the month because I know that every single booktuber on this platform is sponsored by them, and I haven't really seen a lot of extremely honest reviews. Let me know if you would be interested in that video because I would be more than happy to do so. It was actually one of the first video ideas that I came up with. I just don't particularly feel comfortable doing it when I haven't read a majority of the books that I bought from them. So once again, let me know if you're interested in it because I will get on this book if you are. But either way, I mean, I want to read this. I bought it for a reason. This was my pick for a reason. It is just something that is so completely my style, and I cannot wait to dig into it. Next up, I have IRL by Tommy Pico, which is another book that I am just so excited to get to. So I have my regular bookshelf and my regular TBR, but then I have a different shelf of my urgent books that I need to read. And this has been on that urgent shelf for so long, and I don't know why I haven't gotten to it yet. This is a long poem. It is an 100-page long poem, but all of the pages are structured like this, so there's not a ton of words on each page. And if I remember correctly, it is split up pretty nicely. Yeah, there are very clear moments where you can like take a pause, put a bookmark in it, and just set it down. I'm just gonna read you the back of it because I feel like it sells it way better than I ever could. IRL is a sweaty summertime poem composed like a long text message, rooted in the epic tradition of A.R. Ammon's ancient bird songs and Beyoncé visual albums. It asks, what happens to a modern queer indigenous person a few generations after his ancestors were alienated from their language, their religion, and their history? Obviously, I love queer stories. I myself am queer, but I also love supporting smaller indie authors, and Tommy Pico is a smaller writer. I also love learning about Indigenous history and Indigenous culture. So I'm very, very excited to get into this book because I have read a section of it. I actually learned about this book because I studied a section of it in one of my classes. And ever since I read that section, I was just completely enthralled by this. I'm not 100% sure where you can find this. I believe it's out of print. I was very happy when I was able to find a copy of it. Hopefully, I read it by the end of the year so that I can let you know how I like it in my end of the year recap video, because I am so exponentially excited about this book. Since we're on the topic of poetry, the next book that I have is Bless the Daughter Raised by a Voice in Her Head, which is a poetry collection by Worcestershire. I won't spend too much time on this because I'm not super familiar with Worcestershire as a poet, what her themes are, what her style is. I just know that this is a very highly rated poetry collection on Storygraph. It has a 4.19. And I have read specific poems from this collection. I haven't read the entire collection yet, but the poems that I have read are just absolutely beautiful, absolutely stunning, so thought-provoking. I am very, very excited to just dive into the collection. And even though I haven't read the entire thing, I feel very comfortable with recommending it because based on the poems that I've read, the quality of this book is very, very high. Next up, I have another book of the month pick, which is Liquid, a Love Story by Miriam Ramani, I want to say. I'm not even gonna lie, this does have a fairly low rating on Storygraph, but once again, this just seems like a book that is totally my thing. This follows an unnamed Iranian Indian American who ends up going on 100 dates with rich white men and makes a spreadsheet of them with the goal of getting married, I believe. She's a very smart person. She has a PhD, but in the real world, she was not making as much money as she thought she would. So her best friend suggests jokingly that she should marry rich, and she takes that seriously. She goes on these dates and she makes a spreadsheet of it. So I believe that it just follows this summer of her going on all of these dates and trying to find a rich husband. I expect there to obviously be some class commentary, some commentary about race, and I find the intersection between math and love to be really interesting. I hope it doesn't end with like, love can't be figured out through an equation, because like fucking obviously, and I feel like that would be a really stupid message for this book. But hey, what do I know? I'm really excited for this book. And again, it's obscure, it's new, an indie author, I believe it's a debut. I'm very excited about this, and I'm expecting to like it more than Storygraph did. And I am hoping that I'm not wrong about that. Next up, I have Now Go on Grief and Studio Ghibli by Carl Thomas Smith. This was another book that I was quite surprised that it didn't have a ton of ratings on Storygraph. So even though I haven't read it, I want to make more people aware of it because I think that a lot of people will really enjoy this book. From what I know of this book, it is basically what the title suggests. It is about Studio Ghibli and how they explore grief. I am a really big fan of Studio Ghibli movies. I had a coworker a little bit ago who came from Japan, and we would watch movies on the job because it was so slow. And she wanted to watch movies in Japanese, and I didn't always love the movies that she suggested. So we kind of came to an intersection at Studio Ghibli because I always knew that their movies would be really high quality, and she was also a really big fan of Studio Ghibli. So we watched a lot of their movies while we worked together. I have some extremely fond memories with her. If you're watching this, hi, I love you, I miss you a lot, and thank you so much for just watching these movies with me because I really, really enjoyed that experience with you. So I'm very excited to read this book, and again, I feel like a lot of people would really enjoy this book, but I just don't know if they really know about it. I know that a lot of people are very big fans of Studio Ghibli, so if that sounds like you and this sounds interesting, pick it up, buy it, why not? Next up, I have This Other Eden by Paul Harding, which I feel weird putting this on this list because Paul Harding is a Pulitzer Prize winning author, and this book was nominated for the Booker Prize. It has under 5,000 reviews on Storygraph, so I'm including it. I don't care. This is another book where I just want to read you what the description says because I think it'll do a better job explaining it than I would. In 1792, formerly enslaved Benjamin Honey and his Irish wife, Patience, discover an island where they can make a life together. Over a century later, the Honey's descendants and a diverse group of neighbors are poor, isolated, and often hungry, but nevertheless protected by the hostility awaiting them on the mainland. During the tumultuous summer of 1912, Matthew Diamond, a retired idealistic but prejudiced schoolteacher turned missionary, disrupts the community's fragile balance through his efforts to educate its children. His presence attracts the attention of authorities on the mainland, who, under the influence of eugenics thinking popular among progressives of the day, decide to forcibly evacuate the island, institutionalize its residents, and develop the island as a vacation destination. So obviously this book is going to be very deep and very difficult to read, but I also feel like it is going to be an extremely important read. And obviously Paul Harding winning the Pulitzer Prize and this being nominated for the Booker Prize gives me very high hopes and high expectations that I honestly don't think are going to be broken. I'm very excited to read this book. I'm also pretty sure that it's fairly short. I think it's like 200 and something pages. I just think that there's going to be a lot of interesting and fascinating commentary in this book. I'm very, very excited to get to it. I've been meaning to get to it for a long time. Next up, I want to talk about Scenes of a Graphic Nature and Promising Young Woman, both of which are by Caroline O'Donoghue. If you watched my best books of 2025 so far video, you would know that The Rachel Incident is one of my favorite books of all time, and it is written by Caroline O'Donoghue. I think that before The Rachel Incident, she was mostly a YA author, and these are the only books that she has, other than The Rachel Incident, that aren't YA. And I think that these guys are more contemporary fiction rather than literary fiction. I'm just very excited to read these guys. Both of them were blurbed by Dolly Alderton, who I very much so trust. I think that Irish literature is just incredible, so I am very excited to read both of these books. I don't know what either of them are about, but I honestly don't really care. I know that these probably aren't going to be as good as The Rachel Incident, but I'm still excited to read them regardless. I think that Caroline O'Donoghue is so talented, and I really want to read her other work. Next up, I have Monsters by Emerald Fennell. Did you guys know that Emerald Fennell fucking wrote a book? If you don't know who Emerald Fennell is, I'm actually really surprised. She is the director of Promising Young Woman, not related to the Caroline O'Donoghue book. And she also directed Saltburn. And in my opinion, she's one of the most interesting directors working today, but also, admittedly, she's one of the most controversial directors as well. I think the general consensus behind her is that she's a really good director, but she's not a great writer, which I personally disagree with. I think that Promising Young Woman was an excellently written movie, and I think that it deserved the Oscar that it won. There are a lot of pieces of media out there that I understand the discourse behind, but I just personally don't agree with it. And I feel that way about both Promising Young Woman and Saltburn. I think that Saltburn specifically is just a movie whose audience kind of got away from it. Saltburn was not fucking meant for you, Kaylee, with an Leigh, okay? It was meant for the freaks, it was meant for the weirdos, it was meant for the queer people. It was meant for the wildly obsessive and fucked people in the world. That actually sounds a little bit pretentious. Maybe I should take that back. But I kind of stand by it. If you don't like Saltburn, good on you. I'm not even particularly arguing that Saltburn is a good movie. I think that the ending is fucking stupid. But what I am arguing is that I think that the audience of people who ended up watching it was just not an audience that the movie was meant for. I'm sorry. Anyways, enough about Emerald Fennell's movies. She has a book. And I'm very interested to read this book because it follows a 12-year-old boy and girl who end up looking into a murder of somebody in their small town because they're both weird and they're both fucked and they both love murder. I'm slightly hesitant to read this, but I'm also deeply excited because, once again, I really enjoy Emerald Fennell's work, no matter how controversial she is. I think that me and her just kind of understand each other. I think we were raised in very similar worlds, and I really enjoy her. I really support her, and so I just kind of want to engage in everything that she creates. She hasn't disappointed me yet. I think that there is a possibility that she could. Again, I understand and agree with sometimes the discourse behind her art, but I still personally hold her in kind of a high regard. Next up, I have Tramps Like Us by Joe Westmoreland. I just found this at my local bookshop, and I found the cover to be really interesting and the plot description to be just as interesting. So I'm going to read it to you once again. Abused by his father and stifled by closeted life as a teenager in Kansas City, Joe, the wide-eyed narrator of Tramps Like Us, graduates from high school in 1974 and hits the road hitchhiking with Allie, his hometown other queer outcast. Joe and Allie soon find communities of misfits to call their own. The days and nights blur, a blend of LSD and heroin, new wave and disco, orgies and friends, and the spontaneity of youth, all of which is threatened the moment Joe, Allie, and seemingly everyone around them are diagnosed with HIV. But miraculously, the stories survive. This was originally published in 2001, and similarly to the sluts and the F words and their friends between revolutions, I think that it is very important to read older queer literature, especially when it is about the HIV and AIDS epidemic, and especially when it is written by older queer people. Imogen Binney, the author of Nevada, blurbed this, and that is enough to give me complete trust in the quality of this book. I am extremely excited to read it, and I think that a lot of people watching this channel would also be very interested in this. Next up, I have Pan by Michael Clune. This is another book that is just so captivating by its cover alone. I am a very strong believer in judging books by their cover, and I'm judging this and I'm loving what I'm seeing. This follows a 15-year-old named Nicholas who has his first panic attack and starts thinking that the Greek god Pan is trapped inside of him. That's all I know about this book, and that's all I want to know about this book. If this cover and that tagline doesn't hook you, I don't really know what's wrong with you, honestly. This is a newer book which explains why it has the amount of Storygraph reviews that it does. So I do think that this is picking up steam. I think that more people are starting to talk about it. I have heard a little bit about this book. I'm very excited to read it. This is also on my urgent TBR. I'm really hoping that I get to it by the end of the year. If I do, I'll let you know how I like it, obviously. But even if I don't, I think that more people need to know about this book. I think it's interesting, I think it's captivating, and I'm really excited to see how it's going to be received. And last but not least, I want to shout out some local poets from my hometown, that being Isabel Rodriguez and Kieran Runmole. We have Brighter Days and She Who Will Be Named, both of which are poetry collections. I have read Brighter Days and I really enjoyed it, but I haven't read it in a long time. And I've read bits and pieces of She Who Will Be Named, but I haven't read the entire thing. But what I will say is both of these are very heavily inspired by Rupi Kaur, who I know is a pretty divisive poet. So if you're not a fan of Rupi Kaur, you might not enjoy these as much. But if you're kind of neutral about Rupi Kaur or you like her, I think that you should check these out, especially if you want to support some small local poets. And while Rupi Kaur is a little bit hit and miss for me, I think that both of these poets have very distinct voices as poets. I believe that both of these are available direct to print on Amazon. I'm not 100% sure about that though. But again, I wanted to highlight some local authors. I know how scary and intimidating it is to put your work out there. And I'm just so proud of both of these women for doing that. I know that a lot of the poems in here are deeply personal to them, and I'm just so deeply proud of them. And I'm so excited and happy that I have this opportunity to highlight their work. Anyways, that is everything that I have for you guys today. Again, I really hope that a lot of these books were actually obscure. You actually haven't heard of them before, and you're captivated and interested in reading them. I tried really hard to give you a good sell of these books, but also an honest sell of these books, because honestly, not all of these I loved. Not all of these were 5-star reads, but I did enjoy most of them. And I think that as readers, obviously, we all have genres that we're more gravitated towards than other readers. So, for example, something like Every Sweet Thing is Bitter may not have been my cup of tea, but I did enjoy it. I thought it was high quality for the genre that it was in, and I think that it is a smaller book, and so I wanted to let you guys know about it in case you are interested in mystery thriller type of books. But if you are still thinking that I didn't go deep enough, if I didn't go obscure enough, you should leave a comment down below letting us know what some of your favorite obscure books are, what some of your favorite local authors are. I would love if the comment section was just a space to highlight some of your favorite work that you don't really see people talking about a lot. I actually think that that would be extremely cool. If you've read any of these books and you want to second my recommendation, let the people know. But also, if you have another kind of more obscure book or an independently published book that doesn't really have a lot of recognition or advertising, let us know. I would be so interested in what you guys have to say. And if you liked this video, make sure to like and subscribe, all the YouTube shit. I'm having so much fun doing this, and I would really love for you to come along for the ride. But anyways, thanks for watching, and I hope that these books make you feel very smart, very indie, very obscure, and very pretentious. Bye, divas.